Okay, why don't we get started then? Thanks for that heads up, Bryn. That's an important recognition for us all. So thank you all for being here today. We may have some more people join us. This is the kickoff of a conversation that's really important to us at the Water Resources Department to help us shape our ideas for legislative concepts and budget ideas. And in this case, as we prepare for the 2023 legislative session. Yes, deep sigh, take a deep breath thinking about that concept. First of all, what I'm going to do is just step us through the agenda, but I first want to introduce, at least on my screen, the people who are on each side of me and who will be our point persons on legislative matters going forward, both in terms of preparation for 2023, but you'll also, for those of you who are going to be focused on the 2022 short session, these will be our point persons. That is Raquel Ranciere, who many of you know, our Deputy Director of Strategy and Administration, and Bryn Hudson, who's our Legislative Coordinator. The three of us are going to be talking through the agenda today. And I want to step you through that a little bit. There are two main components to the agenda today. One is to step through an introduction of the process and our initial ideas around developing budget, our agency request budget and legislative concepts for 2023. And the second element will be a status implementation update associated with our 2021 budget, which many of you know, there was a big investment in water resources for 2021, and we're doing periodic updates and wanted to take advantage of the time of having you all here. So I'm going to break it down just a little bit more, and then we'll dive in. But we're going to first of all talk about the kind of an overview of the budget process that will not take long. Some of you have been through this drill many times, but for those of you that haven't, I think it's important information. We're then going to talk about our racial equity impact lens that we'll be focusing on for this session. Thank you, Bryn, for that. We will be then doing a overview of the legislative development process, slightly different than the budget development process, but fairly parallel tracks. And then we're going to do, and I think we have materials on this for you to look at as well, but a pretty high level review of the ideas around legislative concepts and the ideas around budget packages that we have today. And you'll note that this is not in great detail. These are our initial thoughts. We want to put them out there for you for your thoughts and reaction. We're not expecting an in-depth discussion today, and we're anticipating and want to make sure that one, we're hearing your ideas, but we're going to have other opportunities as well. We're planning on, and you'll see later that we're planning on having several opportunities for dialogue with you. So if today is more of an opportunity for you to get a first glimpse at what we're thinking of, and for you to start thinking about ideas that you think are important, or if you have ideas that you want to put on our radar screen today, fantastic. But this won't be your last opportunity by a long shot. Then, of course, at the end, we'll wrap up with project implementation update. We've got 3 hours set aside. I don't know that we'll need all that time. To some degree will depend on you and the questions that you have. But again, our goal is to try to be as comprehensive as we can be in terms of describing processes and ideas that we've been thinking of thus far, and to make sure we save some room for some input and dialogue. So with that, we'll keep track between Bryn and Raquel and I. We'll try to keep track of the any chat questions or hands that are raised, and with that, and please, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to raise your hand, and we'll do our best to try to recognize you and get those conversations out there. So with that, why don't we go ahead and get started? We're going to start off with an overview of the budget process, and Raquel is going to take the lead on that if she's still on.
I'm here. All right. And I take it I'm not double muted here because you all are laughing that I'm here. So great. Good morning, everyone. Again, Raquel Rance here, one of the deputy directors here at the agency. And I appreciate you all being here to begin the legislative and budget development process. I know that it is not the best timing for those of you that work on legislative issues. But as you all know, we do this every January even numbered year. So thank you for being here, and we'll try to get you all out early. All right. So for those of you that have not gone through this process before, the budget process is something that we like to highlight because I think it's important for folks to understand what the agency has the ability to make decisions on, and then how that information gets moved along through the process. So the first step in the process is development of what's called the agency request budget. So this is something that we start developing essentially now and working on all the way through until it is due to the Department of Administrative Services on August 1st. And we'll go through a little bit more about what that process looks like in terms of the agency request budget. The agency request budget is essentially proposals for the governor's consideration. We don't have necessarily have as many constraints in terms of, we don't have to balance the revenues in the budget in terms of what the governor has to do for the whole state. So we can put forward proposals that request resources. Then there's the governor's recommended budget. So this usually comes out in December, and this is developed through a process after the agency submits their budget. The Department of Administrative Services essentially reviews that budget, and they develop a recommendation. And then we go through this process essentially, which allows us to work with DAS to discuss what their proposed budget is. And then the governor's office is typically involved in that process. And then finally, the governor's office makes the final decision in terms of what they would like to include in the budget that they propose. And that governor's recommended budget is then published in December. So it will be published in December of 2022 this year. And that's really the starting point for the executive branch in terms of negotiations with the legislature. That document is provided to the Legislative Fiscal Office and to legislators on the Joint Ways and Means Subcommittee. And we work with the Joint Ways and Means Subcommittee on Natural Resources, and they're the ones that ultimately make the final decisions on our budget. So the agency doesn't make the final decisions, the governor's office doesn't make the final decisions. We're informing those decisions, but at the end of the day, the legislature is the one that makes the final decisions on the agency's budget. So with that, Bryn, let's go to the next slide. So here's an overview of kind of our general outline of the budget development process. For those of you that are really savvy on budget, there's a little, I can't see what that is. Okay. For those of you that are really savvy on budget, if you're looking for what's called the DAS budget instructions, that's the Department of Administrative Services, those budget instructions generally don't come out until around March. We, however, want to engage with all of you earlier than that, knowing the time it takes to develop budget proposals, and therefore we start our process earlier than that. But just note that these are approximate timeframes that we see generally every year, but we won't really know all the details of the timeframes until those budget instructions come out. So with that, you'll see in this timeframe, we're from January to March. This is what I would think of as the idea timeframe, where we are working with all of you to get ideas around budget proposals and to start to refine ones that we have. In April, we want to start winnowing that down. So that's where you'll start to see us say, okay, let's try to shift from ideas to now narrowing down and figuring out what we want to hone in on. That's not to say you can't propose things at that point in time. It just means that we would like to actually be in the phase of looking at narrowing. By June 1st, we generally have to, within our systems that we work with DAS, we generally have to lock what's called policy option packages. That's what a POP is. It's called a policy option package. And these are the budget proposals, essentially. And so we have to determine what our titles are for any policy option packages, and then the prioritization for those. That's the first step in the process that gets locked down. So we're looking at that for June 1st. Again, approximate timeframes here based on what we've seen in the past. June 15th is when we really will need to close feedback on the budget narrative. So we have our proposals. We have all the descriptions of our proposals. These are what we call budget narratives. And that's where, if you have feedback, that's about the time frame that we're looking to start to work towards finalizing things. So in July 1st is when we have to then lock budget numbers. So we're not going to be able to go into the DAS systems and make changes on the budget numbers. We just still have some flexibility on those budget narratives. So internally, the agency will be working to edit and refine those and get those into our budget documents. August 1st is when the agency request budget is published. For those of you that have not seen an agency request budget, it is hundreds of pages and includes a lot of numbers and fiscal reports. We tend to, for ease of use, we'll pull out the budget narratives for the policy option packages, which is what most frequently folks are interested in. Those items and previous agency request budgets are posted on our website. And so if you are curious about that, you can go and look at and see what we'd previously proposed. During the summer, as I noted, this is when DAS makes their recommended budget, and we go through the appeals process with DAS and the governor's office. And then ultimately in December, this is where the governor's office publishes their governor's recommended budget. And then during the spring is when we work with the legislature. We have a hearing on our budget. So there's a budget bill that's introduced, a piece of legislation. And that legislation essentially identifies what's in our budget. And at that point in time, the legislature has a hearing on it. There's often negotiations on it. And then usually those budgets tend to move later in the legislative session. So with that, let's go to the next slide. One thing I want to highlight for this year is that there is a new process that agencies will be implementing, which is called a racial equity impact statement. And this is a new process as part of our agency request budget. You can see more information about it in the Governor's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Action Plan, which we have attached, I believe, to the materials. This information is on, I want to say, page 35 of that manual. But essentially, this is a worksheet for us to apply a racial equity lens to the budget development process and assess how programs benefit or burden historically underserved communities. Brian, if you can go to the next slide, please. So agencies have been working with the governor's office in developing community engagement plans associated with this process. And this will then help us to develop this racial equity impact statement. The expectation for agencies is not that we do this for every single policy option package that we have and not for our entire budget, but rather, since this is a new process, the expectation is that agencies do this for programs that the governor's office has identified in this case, we'll be doing a racial equity impact statement on place-based planning. And so we'll be looking to apply that to the budget requests and legislative concepts related to planning, essentially. So through this process, we'll be looking at questions of how can we apply a racial equity lens to this development of this proposal. What are the equity outcomes and impacts of the proposal? Identifying and assessing what data should be utilized and collected. For example, what demographic data may be useful in helping us understand the equity impacts. And then also assessing who benefits from proposals and who is burdened. So those are some of the components that we'll be thinking about as we develop this. I do want to say that the agency is also thinking about this more broadly in terms of our concepts, although we don't have to submit, this impact statement. We are trying to think about who benefits from proposals across the board and who is burdened. And so we look forward to having those discussions and receiving information on that from folks as well. Bryn, let's go to the next slide. Okay, we are going to transition. I guess I'm going to pause briefly here because that was a lot of information, and I think we're a bit ahead of schedule, or we're on time. So we're ahead of schedule. So I want to just check in and see, was there any questions from folks, Bryn, in the chat, or any hands? I'm not good at doing this multitasking here, that folks have on that part of the presentation so far.
Not seeing any hands. Folks, if you need a reminder on how to raise your hand, there's a little reactions button at the bottom of your screen that you can raise your hand. I believe folks who are on the phone can raise their hand with *9. Remember to unmute yourself, which is *6. I see a hand up. I'm having a hard time figuring out who it's from. Peggy.
Yep, I just wanted to remind everybody that there will be a new governor. And so instead of the December deadline, the date, I believe, for a budget to go to the legislature is February 1st. I would assume that they will do it before then, but to be elected in November and come out with a new budget may be difficult for a new governor, depending upon who that governor is.
Thank you, Peggy. This is why we always like to have you in these meetings, because you always know the details. So thank you for flagging that.
This is Tom Byler. I might just add that Peggy's right, that the new governor will make adjustments more likely than not, which is difficult to do with very little time. But we will continue to go through the regular process with the current governor, and a budget will be produced in December. It's just that you could expect that there may be changes made by the new governor after that.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, Bryn, let's go to the next. Oh, no, we're on the correct slide. Okay, so now we're transitioning into the legislative development process. And this process is a bit similar to what you just saw for the budget development process. Through the legislative development process, you'll see here, essentially January through March is when we begin conversations. Although this slide doesn't really represent it, the input on legislative concepts essentially goes all the way through until the legislative session ends, in which the bills are introduced. And so this slide is really outlining deadlines that we have, but note that we, through the process, understand that there's a lot of negotiations that go on in regards to development of legislation. And as a result of that, we're very committed, I think, to trying to find solutions that folks can agree on, and we do put forward that effort. So with that, I'll note that a legislative concept, for those of you that are new to this, the legislative concept is essentially before a piece of legislation is introduced to the legislature. That's when it becomes a bill or a measure. So we talk about it at this point in time. A legislative concept, theoretically, if introduced, will become a bill for us. So January through March, we're beginning our process for receiving input on legislative concepts and the legislation we should run. And then April is the first deadline that we have with DAS. So again, the Department of Administrative Services. This is when essentially our language for our legislative concepts are due. There's an exception to this, which is that if we submit, we still have to submit information to DAS on April 15th. However, we can submit what's called a placeholder legislative concept. This is something that it's not a preferred approach, but is something that we do have as an option. And essentially that gives us until June 3rd to develop the language that we would like introduced. So with that process, between those timeframes, essentially the legislative language that we're requesting needs to go through DAS and through the governor's office for approval. So they have to approve us into whatever legislation that we're pursuing. And through that time, if they do approve the legislation for drafting, it's been submitted to the Legislative Counsel's office. Legislative Counsel develops a draft of the language for the legislative concept. And once that draft is complete, they send it to us. And we have essentially, I think it's 15 days to review the request, 14 days, I'm sorry, 14 days to review the request or to review the language and to request a revision. One caveat to that is if we receive the legislative concept on August, or I guess September 20th, September 30th is the last day to request revision. So we would not have 14 days in that scenario. This is important because we will often need to continue negotiating and discussing legislative concepts. And this is a time frame where we sometimes try to make changes to that language. We only get one revision at this point in time, and as a result, well, sometimes we have to live with the language that we do have. And that means that we will be pre-session filing, assuming the governor's office approves the bill, we pre-session file that bill by the deadline. And then that is introduced and the legislative session begins. And even if we've continued to work on the bill and have more changes, that we will essentially at that point in time introduce amendments to change it to what we have discussed and agreed on. So that is the legislative concept development process. Let's go to the next slide. All right, any questions on that before we move into potential legislative concepts?
I don't
Okay,
see any
Bryn,
hands. Yep, great, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Again, this is Bryn Hudson, I'm the legislative coordinator for WRD. I am going to kind of go over some potential LCs that as an agency we've been mulling around, and then really open the floor for feedback and suggestions that you all may have. So as Raquel mentioned, we are in feedback and information gathering mode right now. So while we have some ideas, we really want to hear from you, and we want to hear what your ideas are and what you think a good legislative proposal might look like, or if you have any feedback or concerns of any of these, we would love to hear from you. So before I jump in and get started, I do want to just give a heads up and note that typically as an agency, we have limited bandwidth to take on a lot of legislative concepts for each session. And we generally try to limit our LCs to less than 5. So as we're having these conversations, I just want everyone to keep that magic number in mind, but also remember that proposals that are, not brought forward this year, we maintain records of and track and may be considered as future legislation. So I'll just kind of flag that behind the scenes process for you all. With that, I want to flag that in your meeting materials, either they were emailed out last night or within the meeting invite, we have a 2023 potential LC handout with all of the topics that we are proposing or thinking about. And then there's several columns for you to add notes, comments, questions, and flag whether or not you'd like to be included in further discussions. And there's also a portion on this worksheet for you to actually put forth some of your ideas or your organization's ideas. So I'll just start out by giving a high-level overview of some of the ideas that we're kicking around, and then we'll open the floor up for discussion. So one idea that we are considering is essentially a placeholder around the transfers of stored water. So those of you who have been looped into this conversation in the past know about House Bill 3103 and the work group associated with that bill. Essentially, we are charged to facilitate a work group on essentially proposals and ideas around the transfer of location of stored water. So we are underway in terms of getting that group stood up and anticipate that there might be some solutions coming forward from that group. So we thought it would be a good idea to consider holding some space and a placeholder for any ideas that might come out of that group. Additionally, similarly along the lines with the transfers of stored water conversation, we are also in the process of standing up a fees work group. This work group was, we were given resources during the last long session to essentially get a bunch of folks together to chat about some more potential long-term sustainable funding solutions for our fee-supported programs. So similar to transfers of stored water, we determined and figured and would like to suggest set a placeholder for some of the solutions that might come forward during that work group would be a good idea to just hold some space for that as well. Another LC that we are considering is around split season leasing. So a split season in-stream lease allows a water right holder to use water within their water right during part of the season and then lease the remainder of the water in stream during the other part of the season. This could be a good tool in cases where a water right holder doesn't actually want to irrigate their land for an entire season. And our authority for this program actually sunsets January 2nd of 2024. And we would like to propose to make that program permanent. So that's why we have suggested this LC as a potential LC for 2023. The next LC is around planning. So similar to in-stream or the split season leasing piece, our authority to provide grants for place-based planning sunsets January 1 of 2023. So we are kicking around the idea and are thinking about sort of what the creation of a new fund for water planning would look like. Some ideas that have been posed are essentially this new planning fund would provide multi-purpose water planning grants to eligible entities in order to help equip them to plan and prepare for their water future. These grants we envision would be a multi-purpose in the sense that different types of planning would be eligible under the program, and applicants would be able to identify which type of plan or plan components it is requesting in funding. So some examples of how planning may be of the several varieties include pre-planning, situational assessments, small communities developing water system master plans or water management and conservation plans, drought contingency planning, or integrated water resources planning, with the caveat that all planning would need to consider both in-stream and out-of-stream needs. The final idea that we're kicking around is depending on the outcomes of the 2022 legislative session around enforcement in cannabis. So those of you who have been keyed into those conversations, there is going to be a bill on cannabis during the 2022 legislative session. I believe it's the House Agriculture, Land Use, and Water Committee is running this bill, and it's focused around water enforcement and how it relates to cannabis operations. So depending on what the outcomes are from that legislation and conversations that are had, there might be an opportunity to propose more legislation to help kind of bolster those policies in the 2023 session. So as I said, those are just some ideas that we've been kicking around. And what we really would like the purpose of this discussion to be is any feedback, concerns, comments on any of our potential ideas. And then what we'd really like to hear are any ideas that you may have and where you see the largest priorities landing for the department. So with that, I see the chat is going. I see Peggy's hand is going up. I would like to remind folks on the phone that it's *6 to unmute and *9 to raise your hand. So I will try to just answer, I'll try to call on folks in the order that I saw their hand go up. So it looks like we got Peggy first up.
Thank you, and be sure and address Oriana's question in the chat. This is Peggy Lynch, Legal Women Voters. Is there anything that the agency needs in order to be able to use the federal dollars from the infrastructure bill? That would be one question that I would have. And if so, we need to make sure that that is addressed so that we can access those federal dollars. The other thing is the House Bill 5006 Oregon consensus conversation. I realize since you don't know what the conversation will be, it's kind of hard to put an idea there, but it might be good to have at least a line item that says perhaps something that comes out of that conversation. Thank you very much. And we're interested in following, of course, the fees work group and the place-based planning work group. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. Raquel, Tom, do we want to respond to any of that in terms of the ARPA dollars if we know anything about that at this point in time?
Not ARPA. Not ARPA,
excuse me, federal infrastructure.
Yes.
Thank you, Peggy.
Let me weigh in on that. A good distinction there, Peggy. I think we don't know right now to what degree our agency will be a vehicle for moving those dollars. I would say that traditionally we haven't been a big recipient of federal funds. That said, we stand ready to be a partner with our local partners who may need these dollars. And if we can be helpful in terms of being a resource and a partner in getting those dollars to the ground, we want to do that. Our agency is going to be part of the governor's infrastructure cabinet. So we're going to be highly engaged and highly involved in coordination activities around connecting the state as well as possible to these federal infrastructure dollars. And at this point, I see an important part of our role is to be a liaison with our local folks and to be an asset and a helper in that regard. But unlike some other state agencies, we don't have kind of a standard funding program that gets continuously filled by federal dollars. So maybe that'll develop. I don't know, but at this point, that's kind of how I'm thinking about our relationship around the federal dollars.
Thanks, Tom. Looks like we have a question in the chat. Raquel, this one might be for you. How is the department thinking about equity across these concepts, and where is the opportunity for a concept that is responsive from a water justice perspective to community needs?
Oriana, thank you for the question. We're in the very early phases with these concepts, and so I think that there is lots of opportunity for us to have those conversations with all of you about how we can think about these concepts and how we can make sure that they are taking into account equity. I think in terms of the where is there an opportunity for a concept that is responsive from a water justice perspective to community needs, I think there's an opportunity for us to have that conversation. What you'll see is we have within the worksheet that we've developed, everyone can propose various concepts. And so if there is a legislative concept that you think that the agency should be proposing that the water justice community thinks needs to occur, we can have those conversations. So that door is still open here. I want to be clear in terms of where we are in the process. These are some of the ideas that the agency has based on primarily what you can see. These ideas are based on one, work groups that we have ongoing, or we have yet to start actually, work groups that we will be starting. And then split season leasing and planning, those are included because the authorities related to those concepts are sunsetting. And then finally, the enforcement one is just given that we're talking about enforcement with legislators right now due to the cannabis issues. And so I do think that there is an opportunity for us to talk about other ideas that may be responsive to the needs of the communities across the state. I'll also note that I certainly am, as we've been talking about enforcement, equity is something that I've been trying to think about because as we know, particularly around cannabis, there are some impacts, right, to traditionally underrepresented and underserved communities. And so we're trying to be mindful of that as we talk about that in enforcement. And I'm happy to have more conversations around some of the items that we've been thinking about. In some cases, it has resulted in us not proposing certain solutions that we thought we wanted in regards to our enforcement actions on cannabis.
Thanks, Raquel. Nikki, I saw your hand go up and then go back down. I don't know if you still have something you'd like to add or contribute.
No, I think it was in response to infrastructure dollars. I think Tom answered that very well. EPA already made announcements on how that will funnel in through the normal federal channels and a liaison. Yeah. So yeah, he did a good job. Nothing to add. So good to see you.
Thanks, Nikki. All right.
Can you, I'm sorry if I haven't been quite as paying attention to stuff, but can you raise the, let us know exactly, is the cannabis issue that people just are illegally taking water in places in the state? It's not that if they get permitted and go through all the legal channels like a normal business, that would not be a problem, right?
Nikki, thank you for the question. Yes, I want to be clear. There are cannabis, marijuana, and hemp operations that are in compliance with Oregon water law, and we do not have concerns about those operations. There are operations, though, that are not in compliance with Oregon water law, and there's many of them. We did an audit of a portion of the registered ODA hemp sites back in 2020. We found that about 30% of those sites that were audited were not in compliance with the law. And so that shows even within the community that is registered and is trying to comply with the laws, that there's, I think, potentially, a education element, right? Given that there's a lot of new folks coming into the industry. And then there is that element of folks that are, not interested in necessarily complying with the law, and those challenges take a lot more effort. So certainly we could talk more about that, Nikki, if you wanted to know more about the challenges down, particularly in the southwest part of the state. We are seeing it in other parts of the state, but the southwest part of the state is significantly a challenge for us. And we're not able to, the workload associated with these complaints that we're receiving is tremendous. So
that's helpful. I assumed that was the issue because, yeah, I think some of those businesses were a little surprised about the amount of regulations and costs that go into being legal. So, but yeah, there are a lot of businesses out there that are doing the legal thing, and I was just wanting to clarify for folks. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other hands or anyone coming off of mute. That's fine. I just want to flag for everyone and just remind folks that the handout that is in your meeting materials is going to be a great resource for you to share feedback with us, and we'll kind of get more at the end of the meeting. We'll go more into how you can and the avenues for you to share your input. But I'll just remind folks that that is attached to your meeting invite, and it was also sent out last night. And if you haven't been able to get it, please reach out to me and I'll make sure you do.
So, Bryn, I think that I would like to pull up the worksheet for budget concepts. And I guess when I say I'm happy to do it, but if you would like to do it since you're already sharing your screen, then that is fine as well. Okay. And I need to make my screen bigger because I can't read that. All right. We're not going to go through every single one of these budget ideas today. This is a list of the topics or items that have been on our minds. I want to, Bryn, if you could scroll down to the very bottom briefly. So again, just like what we've been talking about with the legislative concepts, we're in the early phases, and there is the opportunity to influence this process, and we want to hear from you. So as you can see, there is a whole section here of add your ideas. So this is one way for you to provide feedback. As Bryn will talk more about this later on, this is not the only way to provide feedback. We do want to make sure that we are engaging with you in a way that is meaningful, and that may mean that we set up more meetings. We'll also have, we've set forward meetings like this, where we will come back with modifications and have additional opportunities for discussion. But we also know that that may not be the best way for you to provide feedback. I do know that one of the items that we have set up is that I'm interested, and Oriana, this is something that we've been thinking about, is having additional conversations with folks that are working on water justice issues to better understand the needs there. So we do have at least one meeting set up that I believe you're involved in next week. And we really do look forward to having conversations and understanding how best we can incorporate racial and environmental equity into these proposals or into new proposals. So Bryn, if you can scroll up, you can see that there are a lot of ideas here. And so we're not going to go through all of them. But I might highlight a couple as we go through on each page, just for your benefit. But you all can take the time to read through all of these and get better understanding of what these concepts are. We're looking for, as you can see on this table here, we're looking for feedback from all of you. We'll have some questions that we'll put forward that all of you can give you some idea of the information that we think will be helpful to us. And I'll just note that there is a lot of information here, And we're not expecting folks to comment on every single one of these, but we really want to know what your priorities are. We want to know what your concerns are. We want to know how we can make these, how we can address these issues in a way that you think is best. And so there's lots of opportunity for us to continue to shape how these packages develop. So with that, I'm going to just touch on some of the items on each page. The first one is the Basin and Complex Issues Coordination. So you all, many of you are familiar with this because we've been talking about this for several years in regards particularly to the Deschutes Basin and the Willamette Basins. There have been resources provided for those basins. And really, we've been thinking about how useful those positions could be to helping us address a lot of the water challenges that we have in the state and partner with communities. And as a result of that, we're looking to expand the resources for that effort to other basins in the state. So that's what this is. This proposal includes. We've also heard from some of you last year about an interest in developing budget proposals related to climate and specifically, I think more climate adaptation. And so you'll see here that there's a placeholder for us to hear from all of you about that, but we wanted to at least put the placeholder out there to let you know that we have been listening and that we're interested in having those conversations. Similarly, we know that we have been in a multi-year drought and that drought has had significant impacts across the state. And so we do have a placeholder here for feedback from folks in terms of what proposals we should be considering on that front. I'll skip down to the fiscal and, well, let's go to drought resiliency briefly. This item here is we've been talking about for a while, the fact that there's vulnerable, often smaller water systems that lack the capacity to dedicate staff to planning for emergencies or really to addressing some of the challenges in regards to drought, and that it's helpful to identify where these vulnerable systems are so that way we can really implement mitigation measures. So this concept is around those issues that we've been talking about, I think, for several years now. There's also the fiscal and water rates modernization one. This is where we're looking at, and you'll see this theme across some of our other concepts, is how can we modernize our systems? Today, if you want to apply for a water rate, you need to fill out a paper form and mail it in. And you can't pay by credit card. You have to pay by, check, for example. So what that means is that, we want to modernize and make it easier for both our staff to access that information and also for the public to submit that information. So that's some of the pieces that we're looking at in regards to that. In addition, our fiscal staff, a lot of their processes are paper, and that leads to a significant workload on their end. Go ahead, Bryn, next one. So you've seen some of these other ones before, so I'm gonna just flag on this page here, information technology modernization. This is, again, this theme of modernization that is important for our agency to be able to do the work and also to serve the public and being able to provide the data and information that folks want, as well as being able to improve our processes and be more efficient in our processes within the agency. So that is one that we continue to talk more about as we have more conversations with folks about their desire to access and do various things, particularly with our data. Another item that I will point out is there's a joint funding request to study springs in the Deschutes groundwater study area for folks that track items in the Deschutes. This is an item that really we need to do as part of the Deschutes mitigation program. And so that one is something that we're proposing. And I think it's not, although not on here, I think it's something that we would be seeking to do with some of our state agency partners. Another one recently added, some of you may have seen some of the articles around the challenges in the Lake Avert area. Those challenges require resources in order to address or at least understand the issues. And so there's resources and a placeholder here for further discussion around those Lake Avert issues. Levees is another item that we have not talked about in a while. It's been several years for those of you that have been around. Currently, there's not really a statewide inventory of all levees. So there are levees that are certified under the Corps of Engineers program, and then there's all these other levees that are potentially unmapped and that can pose a risk to people or property. We've seen some of these challenges with levees in recent years. And so this would be, we think, a need for inspecting and identifying where these levees are and identifying safety deficiencies. Okay, one that I want to highlight, it was on the bottom of the one that Bryn just scrolled by, is we know that for those of you that have been around, there was legislation passed related to fish persistence, and ODFW conducts essentially fish persistence reviews on certain municipal water right extensions. And there was legislation that was passed to address that issue as a result of a court decision. And we know that that process is taking a long time in order to get those fish persistence reviews back and to for those affected municipal entities to be able to receive their extension of time on their water rights. So this is essentially something we've been talking about with ODFW, where ODFW would propose a package and have essentially on their end a biologist or fish biologist, I think, to do the fish persistence reviews. As all of you know, legislation that was passed in 2015 under House Bill 3315 says that our agency pays for the work that is done on our fee-based application processes, essentially. And so we anticipate that if ODFW makes a big push on their end to do that work, that we would receive the bills for that. And as a result, this is kind of a companion package where we would ask for the funding to then be able to pay for that work to be done more timely. So another piece of this is also that ODFW bills us for the review of any of our kind of fee-based programs where they do reviews. And the legislation that was passed in 2015 did not actually identify a mechanism to fill in the funding that we would now be paying to ODFW. And so this potentially is also an avenue to fill in that funding. Okay, Bryn, sorry. Now we can move on. So on this page, I would highlight just a couple things in terms of public engagement and communications. This is really an area where the agency is growing and where we need to do more. So we received additional positions to do this work. We received positions to actually have a communications person and help us do outreach and education. At the same time, what we're learning with having someone that is an expert in this area is that we may need a budget to actually have that person be successful in doing this work. And so we're talking more about what that might look like in regards to tools for us on the communications and public engagement front. I want to highlight here, we are interested in having additional conversations on racial justice and environmental equity to understand the needs there and what budget proposals we may want to ask. And again, we have some conversations set up that I hope will help us to better understand the needs. So there's a placeholder there for that conversation. Continuing on, I think I'll just note there's a couple, you can see there's modernization, there's work that we need to do on rulemakings, but you'll see that near the bottom that there's 2 areas where we've had shortfalls. So we have staff that are paid for by scenic waterways funds from the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, and inflationary costs have not kept up, or the increases that we've received from them have not kept up with the personal services increases. And then, as you may recall, during the 2021 session, there was ARPA dollars proposed for addressing some of our water right backlogs and filling in some of the water rights fee shortfalls. We're still waiting to hear whether those ARPA dollars can be used for that purpose. Federal guidance recently came out, and now we're in the process of working with DAS to make that determination. Either way, we do want to have this at least on folks' radar, because we know that this is an area where people have been interested in us making progress in regards to processing time frames. This one, I need to do some more research on the Supreme Court decision, but we have been monitoring Mississippi versus Tennessee, and the Supreme Court did recently make a decision on that case and said essentially that states should enter into bi-state compacts to achieve equitable apportionment of groundwater where aquifers are crossing state lines. And so we anticipate that we should start talking with both all of the states on our borders about this issue. We know that the Washington Department of Ecology is interested in asking for funding on their end for them to be able to engage in potential development of a compact. All right, Bryn, let's keep going down. Okay, we're nearing the end here. For this one, I want to highlight the strategic initiatives, project, and portfolio management. So as many of you know, the legislature approved quite a significant amount of new funding for the agency, and also provided a significant number of new projects for the agency. And Tom, Director Byler, will be talking about this in the second phase of this presentation today. But you'll see in your materials that we have an Excel spreadsheet that essentially, I guess it's PDF now, so it's a table where there's materials that show the projects that we have that are ongoing that we're tracking. And I think there's about 70 on that list. There's a lot to track and coordinate. And so this is really about us realizing that with this growth and with the number of projects that we have ongoing, there's a need for someone to really keep track of that information and help the leadership team understand what projects are having trouble, why they're having trouble, what projects are proceeding forward, where decisions need to be made. And so that's what this proposal is looking to do. You all can think more about that as Director Byler goes through that presentation later on and see all of the things that we have moving. Finally, on this one, I think these are all a little bit more detailed, and certainly items that we have in part proposed in the past. Supporting our planning groups with information, that's the water right characterization tool and report. Water right processing, this one's somewhat of a new one. As you all know, the water rights process is a bit complicated, and there's various steps that folks need to go through in order to successfully complete their water rights transactions. And this water right processing ombudsman, I can't say that. I think I'll have to have Tom say that one for me. I feel like this was a trap, Tom, when you put this word out here for this title. But this this position essentially would be helping and interfacing with these water right holders to make sure that they understand the processes. So that way we're, which I think will in some cases help us be more efficient with water right transactions because folks will have the information and understand what they need to do to complete this. The water planning one here is the one that is the companion. So when you have a legislative concept that has a fiscal impact, you need an associated budget package. And so this is the associated budget package that goes along with the potential legislative concept that Bryn Hudson had talked about. Bryn, next page. I think we're nearing the end here. Yes, we're near the end. So these are some of the ideas and issue areas that we've been thinking about. We want to hear from all of you, your ideas. We want to hear about if we have ideas out there that you think have impacts or concerns. We want to hear those things. And we also want to know how to make packages better or shape them in a way that will be responsive to the needs of your folks. So, Bryn, I think that is it. Let's see if there's any questions. I think we're still out of schedule. So, see if there's questions. Or if you want to throw out an idea now, you're welcome to do that. But note that we have provided this worksheet. It'll give you more time to think through these things, and we can discuss those as well in future conversations. Peggy?
Peggy Lynch, League of Women Voters. So does anybody know the status of the Columbia River Treaty and how that would link in with your comment about the need to address the Supreme Court decision?
Peggy, so the Supreme Court decision was about groundwater. So I don't see it as being pertinent to the Columbia River Treaty. The last I've seen is that there's still negotiations going on between Canada and the US on the Columbia River Treaty. I haven't seen much more details from that. I don't know, Tom, if you have heard anything in more depth, but that's as far as I've seen. Is we get notices essentially when they're intending to meet.
Yeah, I don't have anything on the treaty, but I would mention that with respect to the state of Washington, that we are working and have been for a few years now on kind of cross border water management issues that are surface water related in the Walla Walla, as well as the Columbia Basin area, recognizing that both from a surface water and groundwater standpoint, that we have a shared interest in serving the public to the best of our ability by having better coordination between the states. And so we're trying to get ahead of that. And that position that we referenced earlier would help us with that. It could also help us with our management responsibilities with the state of California and potentially state of Idaho. So that's the idea behind that.
Thank you. One more quick thing. And that's that we all worked very hard to make sure that the next thing on your agenda is going to be all the money and all the opportunities you got in 2021. So I want to make sure that those items get taken care of. And so if we need to be more conservative in 2023, I'm very interested in that, while I still want to make sure that we support and continue to grow the Water Resources Department. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Peggy. That's been on our minds. Tom?
Exactly what I was going to say. Thanks, Raquel.
Okay. Great. And I think one thing I'd add to Tom's note about the Walla Walla Basin. So yes, there's the state compact in regards to groundwater. There was another proposal which I didn't talk about, which is that we've been having some conversations, as Tom was talking about, broader water management in the Walla Walla. And there's also a kind of a placeholder there for that discussion, which I know some of you have interest in. Okay. Looks like I don't see any other questions or comments. Again, this is the first meeting where it's a lot of listening, unfortunately. So we do look forward to making these meetings more engaging down the line here. Bryn, why don't you go ahead to the next slide here, and let's talk about ways to provide feedback.
Yeah, thanks, Raquel. So as both Raquel and I have alluded to, your input is really valuable to us, and the earlier that we engage with you all and receive input, the better and the more effective we will be in incorporating your ideas and comments and collaborating with you. So this meeting, as Raquel mentioned, is we're doing a lot of talking at you, but we don't see that really being the case moving forward. So we proposed a variety of ideas from both the LFC and the budget perspective, but we're really looking to hear your ideas. So as I've mentioned, we have two worksheets, both the LC worksheet and the budget worksheet, that kind of lay out our thoughts and ideas, and then provide an opportunity for you to provide comments and feedback on those ideas, and also provide your own ideas as well. So that is one avenue that you are more than welcome to utilize to get in contact with us. We ask that you provide that written feedback via those worksheets by email to me. My email is in the worksheet that is attached to your meeting materials by the 1st of March. So we've got about a month to sort of get that initial feedback gathering process via that avenue. And basically that March 1 deadline is essentially to provide us adequate time to sift through that feedback that you're giving us, and then prepare for the next series of meetings that will kick off in March on the budget and legislative process. You can also reach out to me or Raquel via email with any other feedback that you would like. You can also request a meeting with us if you feel like you would like to sit down virtually and give us your ideas and hash things out. We also have a variety of Water Resource Commission meetings where you can provide written and verbal testimony to the commission to share your ideas and let them know where you think we need to be making investments and spending time. And additionally, we will be hosting more of these stakeholder meetings. So that's always going to be a good avenue for you to share your thoughts and comments. And then we will also, as we get more clarity on certain LCs and budget packages, some of those will need to result in kind of one-off conversations for smaller meetings and venues for folks who are interested in engaging. And that'll be a great opportunity for you to give more specific feedback, as we start the language drafting process. Other venues, we are happy to come and speak to commissions, boards, whomever may want to hear more about this process and what the agency is up to. But it's just a blanket contact. Reach out to me, and we can help coordinate and get anything on the books or be aware of any other meetings that we might be at that might be helpful for us to be at. In terms of sort of the type of feedback that we are looking for, I know Raquel mentioned that there's a lot of information on both that budget and LC spreadsheet, right? So you may not be interested in every single one of those LCs or budget packages. So it's okay that you don't provide feedback and comments on every single one of those. I think what we're really looking for is essentially a good idea of where you and your constituents are at, where you think that we should be spending the most time, and essentially showing us where your priorities are. If you see a particular proposal that you're interested in, we'd love to hear, where you think there are some strengths, where the weaknesses are, where some challenges may be, if there's any potential equity impacts that maybe we're not able to see or think of. That information is really, really helpful for us as we work to advance racial equity and justice forward with our budget packages. We don't need every single piece of information on every single budget package, as I said. So really these worksheets are helpful for us in beginning to see where each stakeholder group is prioritizing their needs and get a good idea of where there's support and then where there's weaknesses and areas that maybe we need to work through. So as I mentioned, those worksheets are in your meeting invite. I also sent them out last night. If you don't have access to them or you're having a hard time opening them, make sure to reach out to me. My email address is on this slide. So feel free to reach out if you have any issues or would like help getting more information. So I think that's all I've got. Raquel, Tom, anything else to add on ways to provide feedback?
Bryn, I think I would just add, we do have a handout that's titled Feedback from Stakeholders, where we've got all of those questions posed. So you can take a look at that if it's helpful. We also are working to finalize our community engagement plan related to a bit to this process, because we interpret it more broadly, but also more specifically to place-based planning. And within that, we'll be doing some additional engagement, going to seeking to set up meetings with planning groups, as well as seeking to meet with tribes and other venues that so I think this other venues category here, although we haven't detailed some of our ideas, we're certainly thinking about those. So what I would say to all of you is, as you're thinking about our process here, we are adaptable, and we want to make sure that the process that we're running is meaningful to all of you and is a good use of your time, and is respectful of your time as well. And so if you have comments or feedback on the process, on the meeting format, any of that, don't hesitate to reach out to us or let us know how, what is the best way to engage with you all. It may not be through these kinds of meetings, and we're happy to have discussions in terms of, while recognizing our own capacity limits, have conversations about how we can form an engagement strategy with you that suits our needs and your needs.
Thanks, Raquel.
So any questions or comments or feedback on that? Okay.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any hands or any activity in the chat. So I think at this point we are going to, oh, not yet. Just before we switch gears, just a tentative meeting schedule for you all. You should all have this on your calendar. If you do not, please reach out to me and I'll make sure that you have access to the calendar invites. We have 4 more meetings similar to this one, with less us talking at you, slated for between March and June. So March 22nd, April 19th, May 17th, and June 28th. We're planning those to be more long form meetings, similar to this, and really geared toward hearing your feedback and getting input from you all. So those are the tentative meeting schedule. Again, if you don't have those meeting invites, please reach out and I'll make sure to get those on your calendar as well. And with that, we're going to switch gears. I'll pass things over to Tom, who is going to give an update on our 2021 project implementation progress.
Thanks, Bryn. I just say at the outset that I don't think that we'll have this topic in future budget and legislative meetings. We're just taking advantage of the opportunity to reach out to folks in advance of the February session. We do want to have, and we'll be organizing outreach associated with our implementation for as many people as want to hear about our status. But we probably won't combine it with our future budget and legislative prep meetings. So just FYI on that. I am going to, it's 10:17, and I think we'd scheduled up till noon, and I'm going to get you out well before 11, I think, depending on your questions. But I want to step folks through where we're at on our implementation of the budget. So the next few slides are going to be covering that ground. As a reminder for many of you, you're already aware that 2021 was a very significant investment in water. well beyond just the Water Resources Department, $538 million investment in water overall. They really went to a number of agencies, went to specific projects and different arenas that touch on water. But it was a significant signal from the legislature of a greater interest in and awareness of the importance around water. For our agency, it resulted in a significant new workload and opportunity. And I'm going to step you through where we're at on that. We're excited about it. We are approaching this work as a way to help us advance opportunities and priorities really established both under the Integrated Water Resources Strategy as well as our strategic plan. And this is one of the progress updates that we're providing. So if we can go to the next slide, please, Bryn. So for today, very briefly, I'm going to give a very high-level review of the new workload. I'm going to update you on recruitment and project implementation work that we have underway. I want to highlight for you something that many of you, I hope, have seen, but just a document that we've used to help kind of crystallize and help people understand that there are a lot of different important water conversations that are taking place this biennium. And then talk a little bit about our outreach and communication approach. Next slide. So in terms of new workload, associated with our budget, actually the 21 session, the long session certainly was a big contributor. We, as part of that investment, we documented about 40 specific projects that came out of that. And those projects really range in terms of the workload associated with those projects, from dollars that are passed through our agency to help support a specific project that's being done locally, to much more labor-intensive work around task forces and work groups, setting up new programs, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those. We also received 38 new positions associated with this budget, which was a significant increase given that we're an agency of about 175 positions when we started the 2021 legislative session. Well, the legislature also provided an additional investment in December through their investments around drought and cannabis. And as a result, we received 32 additional new positions, as well as some additional new responsibilities and expectations. Next slide, please. So, I am mercifully not going to walk you through all of the projects that we have on our plate. I would point you to there's an attachment that is part of the calendar invitation that is a spreadsheet, and I think Raquel referenced it earlier today. It's got over 70 specific items in there. Those aren't all items that are directly attributable to the legislative investments from 2021 and the special session in December, but most of them are. And it is a vehicle where I hope you can have, if you're interested, some sense of the range of activities that we have on our plates going forward. It's a significant workload. And there are many, many items that are going to be of interest to many folks around the state. It's going to allow us to take on complex issues in the Deschutes Basin with new capacity. It's going to allow us to move some important issues around the Willamette forward, going with new capacity. There's a Harney Groundwater Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program investment that we're excited about. It gives us the ability to move on some important data elements around developing water budgets, which will take time, but it's a significant down payment for us to be able to help in basins across the state have a better handle on the water budget that is available to them. It's going to set up important conversations different parts of the state around transfers of storage or water rights or regional water planning and management. It is allowing us to do engagement in ways that we haven't been able to in the past with traditionally underserved communities, as well as tribal engagement as we're moving forward on setting up a task force, a state agency tribal task force. So there's a lot there. And again, I'm not going to touch on everything. I am going to highlight a few things just to give you a flavor of some of the things that we're working on. But I just wanted you to know that we have a whole lot on our plates, and we're excited about it. And we're doing our best to try to track the progress as we go forward. One of the things to bear in mind with this type of significant new investment happening all within 1 year is that it just takes time to recruit for the new positions. It takes time to stand up new programs. We're doing the best we can to get that started, and I'll tease some of that out for you in the next few slides. If we can go to the next slide, please, Brent. So in terms of project highlights, one of the areas of investment for us was the legislature provided $2.2 million to help us move forward on a backlog of pending protests to water right decisions, proposed final orders associated with water right permit applications, applications for transfers, applications for extensions of time. There's a range of different decision points that we have within our programs where there are due process opportunities for either the applicant or a third party to protest. Due to insufficient resources over quite a long period of time, we have not been able to move on those protests as quickly as we'd like. We've been able to average, at least in the last, I would say, 4 or 5 biennia, maybe move on 2 or 3 of those protests, moving them through the contested case process and trying to resolve those issues in any biennium. As a result, we've got a backlog that at the beginning of this biennium that was around 120, 125 protests. That's a significant amount of work, especially if the vast majority of those are going to go through a contested case and then potentially judicial review. That's a lot of effort that needs to happen. I know that $2.2 million is just a starting point. It's not going to help us to move through everything, but it did give us an impetus to be able to hire a couple of protest coordinator positions internally here. And those positions have been filled. And the Department of Justice, through these funds, is hiring a full-time attorney, and that person will be starting up, I think, next month. And with that added capacity, we have submitted, I think, a total of 31 cases. I think the number is now around 28 or 25 to the Office of Administrative Hearings, which is an extraordinary increase compared to what we've been able to do in the past. Not all of those will move through the process, but it is, I think, a signal of the ambition that we have to try to really move on these and get these things going forward. There's a range of different issues that are in play in terms of transfers, extensions, permits, protests, in-stream water right protests. And we're excited about our capacity and our ability to be able to try to resolve these issues more meaningfully than we've been able to in the past. I will tell you that we're already just the prospect of some of these cases going to contested case has gotten more attention from the parties than we've seen in the past. We're seeing some cases where the protest has been withdrawn. We're also seeing some move towards settlement in ways that we hadn't been able to move before. So I think that's all very positive. Our goal is to try to resolve these in the most cost-effective way possible, but having these resources has been very catalytic for us so far. I also wanted to mention House Bill 2145. This is a modernization bill Some of you may recall, we've been on through our strategic plan, we've been emphasizing modernization. In 2019, we modernized our dam safety program, and in 2021, it was our well construction program. We placed a great emphasis on public safety by selecting those program areas. And we're very excited about being able to move forward on that modernization work. So there's a lot that we have to do in terms of standing up the new sideboards associated with our well construction program. But I also wanted to mention with 2145 that we also, there is a program associated with helping domestic well owners. And we've seen through, it's a grant program, and we've seen certainly last year the need to be able to provide resources for domestic well owners who are facing dry wells or problems with their wells, and not having enough resources to be able to act on that. And this grant program was added, some money was added to that in the December special session. And we're working hard to get that program up and running by April this year so that it's available if we have another hard year going forward into 2022. I mentioned dam safety. We received funding, mostly ARPA dollars, but we also have some general fund. We had $1 million contract recently go out and was finalized associated with the general fund dollars that we have. And that's going to help us to really study and understand atmospheric rivers better in Oregon, which can have major contribution to flooding and flood events and extreme events associated with water in the wintertime, of course. That's obviously an important consideration for us to grapple with as we work with the non-federal dam owners in making sure that those structures are safe based on the threats and standards or threats that folks may be facing in today's world. And this will allow us to really have much more up-to-date information to base what kind of safety needs these structures are going to need over time. And in terms of water budgets, I apologize. That item, I think, was a holdover from an earlier draft. Just to stress that it's really important for us to work on our data elements. We know we're in an era of increasing scarcity around water, and being able to have data that can help us manage and make decisions around needs both at the individual and community scale is going to be increasingly important. We're very excited about the new investments there, and are hiring folks and working with our federal counterparts and others to make sure that we can pull together data that's going to be meaningful and useful for folks as they make decisions going forward. Next slide, please. Well, in terms of recruitments, I mentioned the new positions that we have. Just for context, for many of you, at this time a year ago, I was expecting our budget to get cut. We were struggling under the COVID downturn that we had that hit the economy in the previous year in 2020. And we've been struggling on a number of issues even prior to that. So our fortune changed very quickly and somewhat unexpectedly, but we're very excited about having the new positions. But I would mention, in terms of one of the attributes and effects of being underfunded for a state agency is that what often happens is that we hold vacant positions open for periods of time. So as a result, one of the things to bear in mind is that we started this biennium not just with the new positions, the 38 new positions in July, as well as the 32 new positions in December, but we also had existing vacancies that we needed to fill. So there's a lot for us to do in terms of recruitment going forward. Next slide, please. One thing to bear in mind also as we do recruitments is that sometimes filling a vacancy creates a vacancy. We have had lateral movement within the agency, which is exciting to me. It gives our staff an opportunity to stretch themselves and do new things and to move up and to advance their careers. But when that happens, of course, it creates an opening, a new vacancy that we have to fill. And so we've been dealing with that a little bit. As you can see here, we've had 8 vacancies created by virtue of our staff moving to new positions through lateral moves. And of course, we also have departures. People retire or decide to move on for their own career purposes. And we've had 3 of those happen as well. As of, I think in January, or perhaps by the end of December, we had 27 positions filled to date. We have 14 recruitments that were opened in December. And we had roughly about 90 vacancies yet to fill, and when you include the 32 new positions that we received in the December special session. One thing I want to note is that as a result of the new budget and the new positions, we made some organizational changes because we knew that we needed to have the internal operational capacity to be able to move on all of these recruitments. And so we hired an additional HR position to help us with recruiting. That position took a few months for us to fill, but the recruitments in December, the 14, is an indicator of the benefit of having that position, because that number was greatly exceeded the number of recruitments that we opened in previous months. So we're expecting to get more and more agile with this over time. If we can go to the next slide, please. So some of the challenges that we have, it was mentioned earlier, the ARPA dollars. I think Raquel mentioned that we still don't know whether these funds will be eligible for some of the items that they were attributed to in our budget. I'm actually not very optimistic that we'll be able to use the ARPA dollars to help us deal with our water rights backlog issues. And by that is not the contested case or protest backlog. These are our pending applications in our various areas. And the legislature provided some resources for us to be able to whittle away at those. But those are all ARPA dollars, and I'm not sure we'll be able to hire positions with those funds. So I wanted to put that on folks' radar screens. There's also a water rights work group that is funded and supported with ARPA dollars, and we may not have those funds as well if they are not eligible. The time will tell, and we're hoping to get some feedback soon from the Department of Administrative Services on the eligibility. The other thing just to mention, as if I think I've alluded to this already, is the recruitment process takes time. We've done pretty well with our recruitments, but they don't all. We don't always get the suitable candidates in recruitment. Sometimes they take a little bit longer. And we've also noted that it's super competitive out there. We've had candidates pull out of our processes because they've been able to find other positions. So it's an interesting time right now to be recruiting. If we go to the next slide, please. So some of you have seen this. I am not going to step you through this document, but I want to refer to it because I think it's an important reminder for us all that there's a lot going on right now around water. This document was developed late summer, early fall in cooperation with Representatives Helm, Owens, and Reardon, and Oregon Consensus, really with the idea of trying to help people understand that there's a lot of different efforts that are underway this biennium and important conversations around water. And this doesn't attempt to try to cover all of the ground. It doesn't correlate with 70 positions that you see in that one table that we've put in, that we've made available to you in terms of the projects that we have. But it does, it is an attempt for us to try to help you understand that there are a number of important conversations and activities going on that we think are highly connected to each other and connect to the kind of broad purposes of the integrated water resources strategy. And so this table on the left-hand column is an attempt to list those various activities. Some of them are very much state-led. Some of them are partnership-led. Some of them are local-led. But they are, while they are similar, they also are distinguishable. And so we wanted to put that out there for folks. And one area of confusion that I'm seeing currently is as we're starting to move next Monday, we have scheduled the first meeting of the Regional Water Planning and Management Work Group, which is the second item from the top on the blue area on the left. But we're also working diligently with the 9 federally recognized tribes to set up a work group, a task force with state agencies and tribes. And I've just noticed that the timing of that has been tough. And I know folks struggle to understand which group is which. So if you are feeling like you are confused about what's happening, it's okay. There's good reason for it. But I would encourage you, if you are confused at any point, to reach out to me, reach out to Bryn or Raquel, and we can try to help clarify which process is which, and we'd be happy to do so at any time. So we can move to the next slide, please. So communication is going to be really important for us going forward. This meeting today is an opportunity for us to do an update to as many stakeholders as we can reach, and we will have more of these, and we will be sending out notices of those over time. I would appreciate any feedback you have in terms of how frequent would be useful for you. My thought process is maybe to make these quarterly or something along those lines. But again, if you think that having them more frequently would be useful, that's fine. I've also heard back from some of our stakeholders who wanted specific updates or smaller conversations around this, and I'm happy to set those up with anyone who is interested in having those types of conversations. We want to keep you as up to date as possible. We want you to understand what we're able to do, and perhaps most importantly, or what we're not able to do, because I do think that we're not going to be able to cover as much ground as I would like, as we would all like, I think, over the course of the biennium, given the significant work that's been put on our plates in a very short period of time. We will be also giving status reports to our commission and as they meet. I'm confident we'll be continuing to do updates to the legislature as they see fit. And one of our goals, and we're now building some capacity to be able to do this, is to have a web page on our website that could kind of be a bit of a clearinghouse for information around the different work groups, as well as the different efforts that we have underway. That would be another information point for any of you who are interested in kind of understanding what's going on, or even trying to get a sense of what questions to ask. Next slide, please. So just to wrap up, we're very excited about this budget. It's an amazing opportunity, and we want to thank the many of you who have been involved with our issues for a long time, and I think who have an understanding of how significant this investment is. I think we have a shared interest in trying to continue the momentum that we have. As was referenced in a question earlier, we know that some of the work that we have started through the 2021 budget is something that will need to continue over time. We'll be thinking about that as part of our 2023 budget requests, and I would appreciate any feedback that you have as we have those conversations about how we can make sure that we continue this good work that's started. And I look forward to more conversations with you down the line. I think that is the last slide, and we'd be happy to take any questions on this with our remaining time. And Peggy, we can always rely on you.
Oh, where's the rest of the people? I know we're not in a room, so we can't see each other. But I'm interested in hearing from others. What I really wanted to ask is, thank you very much for this large piece of work. How often do you plan on updating it? And is it possible, reasonable for those of us who are interested to get a copy when you do update this? This is something that's really important to us. We helped make it happen, and we want to see the progress that you're making. So what's the best way to do that?
It's a great question, and I think we're kind of feeling our way through that ourselves, both internally. We've developed some tools to try to help us organize that ourselves from a project management standpoint. We've set up a management team that's specifically looking at getting these different recruitments and programs set up, making sure that we're coordinated internally. One of the things that we are doing at this table that lists all the projects, we've got project managers associated with those different projects, and an expectation that they update that document. I think every couple of weeks is how we're doing it. I don't know. My hunch is that maybe we would look at, once we get the web page stood up, that we would have this type of document available and could do monthly updates. I think that would probably be, that's my best guess, that it would be a meaningful period of time for folks. Some of these projects are moving faster than others, is the bottom line. And so we're not always going to see updates on some of these, even within a month's period. But I do think it's important to be able to track our progress over time, and we're looking for ways to do that. I would encourage you all, as we go down this process, I mean, we're learning as we go, both in terms of trying to manage this and communicate about it. So if you have thoughts about ways for us to better communicate this information, we're very open to hearing your thoughts about improvements that we could make. Looking in the chat, thank you, Ken, for your feedback on the CREP position, and thank you for your work there as well. It's been a good partnership. Any other feedback at this point? I know we've thrown a lot at you today. Some of you may need to spend some time digesting. Again, we're going to have more conversations around the budget and legislative development, and we look forward to your participation and hopefully others that maybe not have been able to be here today. And I also want to make sure that you know that we'll have more conversations around the implementation issues.
Hey, Tom, it looks like we got a question in the chat. Do you have any advice on how folks can stay updated on the House Bill 5006 work group, including how to join the meetings?
Yeah, so this is the regional, I think this is the regional work group that is being referenced here. And the first meeting for that group is scheduled for Monday afternoon. And it's going to just be an organizational meeting. It won't be very substantive, but we would welcome anyone to participate. I know that we're going to be sending out an email to a broader listserv that we have that covers many more individuals than those who have expressed interest to date on that specific work group. I know Oregon Consensus, who's running the process, has been reaching out to a number of folks, but we're trying to broaden our bandwidth. So something will be going out today or tomorrow on that. We're also hoping to get a web page set up so that will be another source of information for folks. If you aren't on a list right now and not receiving emails around this, I would recommend that you send me an email or Raquel or Bryn, and we'll make sure that we get you connected to the right communication network.
Okay, I don't see any other hands or comments going up. As I mentioned, this is the first of many conversations. So we have posted many of these meeting materials on our website under our legislative and policy page. So that information will be there on our website. As a reminder, this meeting has been recorded. So once we all hop off and move on with our day, we're going to work to get this presentation and recording posted on our department YouTube page. Once we get that posted, I will be sure to send that link out to all of you to ensure that you have a record of it in case folks had to jump off and get on with their day. So with that, we will go ahead and stop the recording and conclude the meeting. And I just want to thank everybody for your time today in anticipation for a 3-hour meeting. We got you out and